Thank you so much for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Happy
First
to be here.
is, how did you find an interest in opera and what about it were you drawn to?
So in terms of getting into opera, I grew up around it. My mom was second oboe in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra for 32, 31 seasons. And so she was always going into the Met and she would bring me there, even when I was a baby. And so I felt like I grew up there. And my dad has been a fan of opera for over 50 years and he's always loved it. So we always had it playing in our house, recordings. They never forced it on me or anything, but I when I was 5 years old, my dad was listening to a broadcast of Wagner's Siegfried from the Bayreuth Festival, which is every year happens in Germany, and it's exclusively about includes Wagner's operas. And in this particular scene of the opera, the main character was forging a sword and making a lot of, banging, clanging noises. And I asked, what is that? And he explained, well, this character is forging a magic sword, which he's going to use to kill a dragon to get a bunch of gold. And I thought, oh my God, this is so cool. Is there a video of this? And he ended up putting on our system a DVD of the Met production by Otto Schenk, and I absolutely loved it. And we ended up watching the entire Ring Cycle, which is very long, made up of 4 separate operas. And then the next season, when I had turned 6, I begged my parents to let me go see it in person at the Met. And my mom was playing in the pit, which was also very cool. And I ended up going, and that's kind of what did it for me. So it's a kind of unique experience. I mean, not everyone grows up with a family member literally working at the Met, but I feel fortunate to have had that in my life.
And how do you think having exposure to like not only people who worked in opera, but people who just played music, like musicians, how do you think that influenced like other aspects of your childhood and early life?
Yeah, I think definitely the number one thing that having a musician in the family taught me was having a good work ethic. And whether it came to practicing my own instruments, because I started on piano and French horn as well, before I started taking private voice lessons, and then, of course, joining the Met Children's Chorus. But it was also in terms of how I did my homework and any other facets of my life, just to keep everything organized and to constantly be creating goals for myself as to how to improve, in every facet of what I was doing. Because I mean, surprisingly, my mom, by the time she was at the Met for 30 plus years, she wasn't practicing every single day, but it was because she'd put in those hours beforehand for many, many years in school. And then when she got to the Met, learning all of the operas, all the scores that she needed to know. So it's just, I think the number one thing was discipline, but also to have fun and enjoy what you do. A career in the arts can be, scary at times because it's not necessarily certain, what the next job will be and what the next paycheck is. But it definitely, having a musician and seeing in the family and seeing how happy she was doing what she did was for sure an inspiration.
That's so cool. Like, yeah, many people I've spoken to have talked about that maybe their parents aren't as supportive of them and like were unsure about their career, but it looks like you had a lot of support from your family and kind of grew from.
Yeah, I feel extremely, extremely lucky. I know that's not the case for everyone, so I feel very lucky that I have my parents and they're who they are.
My
Yeah.
question is, how did your love for opera grow as you got older and progressed through like middle and high school?
Yeah, so obviously I caught the bug when I was 6. And then I mustered up the courage to audition for the Met Children's Chorus when I was 8. And I got in. And so I was there for 7 seasons. And sang on the Met stage over 100 times, 150 times, and loved it. And I knew once I was it was beginning to look like it was probably time for me to move on. You know, I'd grown taller and my voice was developing because I was starting to take private voice lessons. Even so, I knew from very early on in the time in the children's chorus that I wanted to pursue a career as a solo singer, having seen and been on stage with all of these artists like Jonas Kaufmann and Elena Garancha and so many. And so it just wasn't even a question for me. And so my love for opera grew when I started studying privately and taking voice lessons and starting to develop vibrato and things like that, and starting to sing arias from operas that I'd heard, you know, like getting to sing Susanna's aria from Le Nozze di Figaro when I was younger was so exciting for me, and it still is. So I ended up going after the children's chorus. I went to Manhattan School of Music pre-college for a couple of years, where I got to study voice in a conservatory-like environment every Saturday, where I'd have my lessons, but also have theory and ear training and maybe some coachings and acting. And I loved it, absolutely loved it. And I also ended up double majoring in French horn because the orchestras were great and I wanted to play. So all of that made me think, yes, I would love to go to a music conservatory for college, and that I loved being surrounded by music all day, every Saturday. And I thought, what if this could be Monday through Friday? What if it could be all the time? And so I auditioned and ended up getting into Manhattan School of Music for college. And I loved it there, and I loved it so much that I ended up staying there for my master's. So it was a great experience because not only could I study with great opera faculty during the day and get a lot of great instruction, but I could take the subway 7 stops down to the Met and be able to continue to grow my love for opera, and also to learn from the people on stage, you know, what to do and also what not to do. You never know. But that was a real advantage, getting to stay in New York and getting to grow my love for opera there. So
That's really cool. I kind of touched on these questions earlier, but what was the specific application process for these different schools you had to go through, and was there a specific person or a group of people that really helped you navigate what you had to do, and like kind of tell you should do this or you should do that?
yeah, I remember feeling it was a very overwhelming process, especially applying for college, undergraduate from high school. You know, it was very overwhelming because I was getting mixed messages from, like, my school guidance counselor, for instance. He meant well, but I clearly stated I really want to go to a music conservatory. And while I graduated top 10 in my class, I did really well academically. I frankly, my senior year, I didn't have to take a 4th year of math, and I didn't really want to. But he said, no, you'd be shooting yourself in the foot if you didn't take calculus. And I was like, okay, you know, MSM and all these other places are not going to care, but whatever. So I had that, but I also luckily had my voice teacher at the time in pre-college, as well as a teacher. His name is Mark Oswald, who I ended up working with at Manhattan School for all 6 years I was there in college. I had already started working with him a little bit while I was in high school, and he was a really good mentor for me in terms of preparing for the auditions and what to sing and all of that, where I should be looking. And I also had some teachers in high school who I remember I asked for letters of recommendation, and they were people I felt close enough to that I could really, you know, ask in confidence, and they knew exactly what my goals were and where the places I wanted to go, where I wanted to apply. So that was important, like having a team. And also, of course, my parents, who have been just a rock solid support for me for all of my life. And so they would also help me and say, hey, have you thought about applying to fill in the blank, you know? So yeah, it definitely was a grueling process though, because a lot of the schools wanted different things in terms of repertoire and essay topics. You know, each school wanted an essay and recommendations and how many. And so it was definitely challenging, but made it through alive. So
This is like backtracking a little bit. How did you balance your time, especially during high school and your teenage years? What were some sacrifices you had to make? I know like giving up the Met Children's course must have been one of them, but what were some things you had to do to continue pursuing your hobby of singing?
yeah, so leaving the children's chorus definitely was very hard for me because, as you know, it is quite a commitment. You know, going to class at least once a week, if not twice, and then all of the rehearsals, the costume fittings, the performances, you spend a lot of time there. So to all of a sudden not have that anymore, I felt like my heart was just a piece of my heart was just ripped out, and I knew that I needed something to fill that void. And so that's when I said, let me try auditioning for the Manhattan School of Music pre-college, as well as Juilliard and Mannes. I auditioned there too, just to have something, a musical outlet that was still separate from any music I was doing in high school. And so that was great for me. But that being said, in my last 2 years of high school, it was essentially like I was going to school for 6 days a week. So that became really exhausting. But I somehow managed to pull it off. I remember I would spend my Saturdays during pre-college sitting in the library at MSM doing any leftover homework I had from my classes, from my regular school. You know, writing one of my classes, I had to write a weekly essay, and I would always make it a point of, before my orchestra rehearsals, writing them while I was in the library. So it definitely it was hard to find a lot of free time, but that being said, for me, especially on Saturdays, making music was just so exciting. It didn't even feel like work. It felt like fun, you know? And so in a way, it didn't feel like it was a grueling 6-day school week. But yeah, it was important to definitely find times, you know, maybe at lunch I wanted to like play games on my phone or something, but I remember really trying to get as much work done like before I got home as I could, so that way when I got home I could truly rest, because that was important too, to be able to get enough sleep and enough energy to be able to function and handle a busy schedule. But yeah, I think, I don't know if that was if I could explain all that, but hope that was okay enough. For if I can elaborate, you know, let me know.
That was perfect. This is the last question, but what does an average day in your life currently look like? Because I know you're like going to all these opera companies. Are you moving around? Do you have a lot of free time, or are you constantly busy? Like, what does it look like?
It's kind of a weird mix. It feels like at the moment, since I'm kind of, I just finished a 2 year residency with Detroit Opera, where I was there working with the company every day and getting training, but also like covering and singing in their productions. And so all of a sudden, I'm back in New York, and I have a lot of time just where I have to make my own schedule. So I mean, every day is different, but I'd say at least I would say maybe earlier in the fall, like at least once a week, I would have an audition in the city. So I currently live in New Jersey, and so I take the bus into Port Authority, and then take the subway or walk 12 blocks down to Opera America, and I'm singing for fill in the blank company, fill in the blank resident artist program, fill in the blank manager, you know, trying to put myself out there. And a lot of times, if I'm not going into the city for an audition, I'm on my computer applying for other things. I also teach. I have a couple of piano and voice students who I love to teach. And then on the weekends, I have a church gig in the city that I go in for and sing every Sunday. So overall, oh, but then also in terms of my free time, I also I love sports. I'm a huge New York Mets fan, and I became a Detroit Lions fan while I was living there. And I love to cross stitch. I have my own Etsy store where I sell my own like opera cross stitch pieces and other things. So it's all kind of a balancing act that any given day can be super busy where I'm, trying to network or working, but then, once I am able to relax, I really try to relax, and just really take advantage of that. And also, one more thing is also finding time to practice, which is on me to do. No one's telling me, Melanie, it's time to practice now. I have to tell myself that. And so I try, especially on the days I don't have a lesson or an audition or something, I always try to find an hour at least to practice my repertoire, do my exercises so I can keep all of my muscles in shape. Because when you're singing, it's basically like being an athlete. So if I go a while without singing, it can feel like, wait a minute, what's going on? So yeah, it's a balancing act of working hard and then playing hard. So
Thank you so much. This is really nice of you to agree to let me interview
oh
you.
my gosh, of course. Yeah, thank you so much for having me.